This is Amy,
And Melissa,
and we're the Dyslexia
Dyslexia
Duo.
Duo.
That will get synced up, Karen. Don't worry. So today we have with us, so excited that she agreed to do this. We have a very special guest on with us today. We'd like to introduce somebody that most of us know in the dyslexia world, Miss Karen Avrit. So Karen, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell our audience who you are, what you do, all the things.
Well, my name is Karen Avrit. I am the Director of Dyslexia Education at Scottish Rite for Children in Dallas, where I have been for the last 30 years. But I'm probably best known as the author of the curricula, most recent set of curricula from Scottish Rite.
Awesome. Awesome. So you had some past chair roles in Alta and Inslick as well?
Yes, I did. I am a past president of both organizations, Alta first, and then a few years later, I became president of IMSLIC.
Very nice. It's impressive with all that you do too. I can't imagine. I can barely keep my head above water doing two separate things. I can't remember. I can't understand how you can do all of it. So tell us a little bit about did you start off in education? Did you have a different career before you started?
I was in education. The first year I became a teacher. You know, you'll take anything for money your first year.
Right.
And so I took 6th and 7th grade English and annual. I had the annual staff from the high school annual. I know. Now I was trained as an early elementary teacher, but again, money is money. And,
Right.
you know, in 1983, that was important. And so I became junior high English teacher. I had the high school annual, the high school debate team in a tiny little district outside of Corsicana.
Wow. I kind of started the same way. I graduated in 91 and I took my first teaching gig in Slidell, Texas. And I taught 4th, 6th, and 8th grade language arts. And I was the cheerleader sponsor. Didn't matter. I was never a cheerleader a day in my life. They go, you have the hair for it. I was like,
Yeah,
what?
I know. Same way. I had never been on an annual staff, never participated in an annual staff, but okay. And so I did that for 1 year. And then the very next year, a kindergarten job came open. And then I went to where I was supposed to be in kindergarten. And I was in Blooming Grove for 5 years. And then a job came open in Corsicana. And I came to Corsicana as a 3rd grade teacher, kind of where I stayed for the next 6 years. And then a dyslexia therapist job came open. So I started my training at the hospital.
Oh, that was my next question. Did you start as a therapist in training?
Yes.
Okay.
So I started as a therapist, going through training at Scottish Rite and 504 coordinator. You know, you don't get to be just one job.
Right.
And so I did both of those things for a year. And that summer, Connie Burkhalter was the director, and she asked me, would you like to be an intern for the summer? And I was like, sure. No idea what that even meant. But I just always said to my husband when I was coming home from Scottish Rite, I'm going to work there one day. That was kind of my goal. And halfway through the summer, Gladys Kolonowski, Dr. Waits, Dr. Black, and Connie came to me and said, would you be interested in a position here at the hospital? And I was like, yep, sure would. I had to come back and tell my superintendent that I was leaving. And he said, great. So you'll train 2 people to take your place next year at the hospital? And I said, sure. So I went to work for the hospital in July of that year. And kind of that I was there in July. And interestingly enough, I was going to move to Dallas. But in October of that year, on Halloween Day, I had a brain tumor
Mm.
that was identified first, probably with Dr. Waits and Dr. Black.
Oh,
I was walking, that's when the lab school was across the street.
okay.
And so I was walking across the street to go to the lab school, and I kept falling down. And so I came back across, and Dr. Waits did what I now know was a neuro exam on me. And I fell into his arms, and he said, Miss Avrit, dial your doctor's number and let me have the phone. So I had an MRI that night, went in the hospital the next day, and had brain surgery 3 days later. So,
Wow.
yeah, yes,
That's incredible.
And how many, might be telling your age here. I don't want to
that's
put you on
okay.
the spot. How many years ago was that?
That was 30 years ago, right after I started to work there. And so the part of my brain that really was affected was the frontal lobe, the temporal lobe. And so it was behavior centered, which was kind of crazy because I happened to have an ADHD son who I never understood until after all of a sudden I had every behavior known to man, but I had no stopping it.
Oh,
So
wow.
when you think about your children, when you are teaching your children, stop crying now, that's enough. I didn't know when we would watch a sad movie, I might cry about it for a week. If I got mad, I got it got to the point I broke several plates and cups and glasses and computer screens. But then my family bought Corel because they thought, oh, that'll be good. She won't be able to break that. Wrong. You hit Corel on a sharp edge, it shatters. So
Oh,
I did that for a while. Then I got to eat on plastic. And but I went through behavior training.
oh, wow.
And, I always think God has a plan for everything, but sometimes I always say, I wish he'd give it to me in a burning bush, audible voice moment, but he doesn't seem to do that. So, really, it taught me about behaviors like ADHD and um, emotional, social behaviors that kids don't want to have, but they can't help it. And so, that's exactly what I had. And so I had to go back through learning all those emotions. And when you feel that tightness in your throat coming and you're about to just walk away and stop and, don't actually hit anybody or throw anything, to just calm down from that. So it was quite a learning curve for a while. But, I say this all the time. Before that, I was a sit in the chair, back straight, feet on the floor, light on the paper, nobody talking, one thing at a time person. So I truly, truly believe that without that in my life, I would never have been able to accomplish what I have.
That's an incredible viewpoint to have, to be appreciative of what seems like such a big health event. It is not seems like what is a big health event,
Mhm.
and to be appreciative and take that turn, that spin with it. That's amazing.
And put yourself in other people's shoes and understand what our kids are going through as well.
Yes. And I think that, I always try to say, okay, I know there's a purpose for this. If you would just tell me.
Yeah.
And, I could endure it a little better, but it took me a few years to get to that point. But really, when I began to understand my own child and then the children that we work with every day at the hospital in our lab school so much better, then I began to realize, okay, I get it. And to be able to know that there's absolutely no way I could have done the curriculum before,
Really.
because that just wasn't me,
Yeah.
wasn't who I was.
That's incredible. That's incredible. So you had said you've been at Scottish Rite for 30 years. What's some of your favorite memories of Scottish Rite?
Oh gosh, there are so many, you know, amazing memories at Scottish Rite, not just of the center and the department, of which I have several, of which I'll tell you in a minute, but one of my, just the environment in which we live there at all times. If you ever get depressed about your child with dyslexia, go sit in the lobby of the hospital and watch what comes in there and the attitude of those children. And here's my example. One day I was downstairs and there were two siblings in wheelchairs, motorized wheelchairs, just kind of zooming down the hall at top speed. And their mother said, called out their names, and she snapped her fingers and she said, "You two stop right now or I'm going to unplug your batteries." And I just busted laughing. And she looked at me and she said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm really not that kind of mother." And I said, "No, ma'am, whatever you need to do to get your child's attention, I understand." But, I mean, it's just kind of that attitude that people accept what is there. And the way she disciplined her child was, if you won't quit, like I would yell at Michael, "Quit running down the hallway, I'm going to give you a pop or whatever." First was, "I'm just going to unplug your battery and you won't be able to do that anymore." So I thought that was great. And probably with children, my favorite memory in the lab school was we had a young man who, to say he was a behavior problem would be nice.
Yeah.
And he was an older student, like seventh, eighth grade. He didn't want to be there. Didn't exactly come from the best, side of town or whatever. But his mom, bless her heart, she was determined that he was going to be there every day. He was going to learn to read and whatever it took. So he always gave me a hard time about my scooter. And those of you who don't know me, because I don't have complete control on my left side due to this surgery, I ride a scooter, especially if I'm going distances across the hospital. And so this guy was like, "Are you ever going to let me ride that scooter?" And out of nowhere, I just said, "I tell you what, if you stick with this and graduate on your graduation day, you can ride this scooter." And he was like, "Really?" And I was like, "Yes, sir." So sure enough, graduation day came. He walked across that auditorium and got his certificate. I walked him out in the hallway, got off the scooter and sat on the bench and said, "Here you go." His mother's eyes got about this big. And she said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I promised him a year ago that if he would finish, he could drive the scooter. He kept his end. I'm keeping my end." And
Oh
he
my-
did. And all it took was one time up and down the hall. He was done. But the fact that I kept my promise to him and that he kept his promise to me, was the key. That's one of the
Incredible.
most significant memories. And then there are so many memories with my team through the years of writing and the different team members I've had. But probably the most honored part I've ever had was when Ailett Cox passed away. IDA called and asked if we would do a documentary talking about her. And so I called Dr. Waits, who was retired by then, and I said, "Dr. Waits, would you come in and let me interview you about Ailett Cox?" And he was like, "Yes, ma'am. I'll be there this afternoon." I was like, "Well, wasn't quite ready, but okay, we'll do it." He came in and I interviewed him. And if you never had a chance to meet Dr. Waits, I'm so sorry, because he was he was a man who was going to tell you like it was. And that was just it. And he came and I said, "Dr. Waits," I said, what would you consider to be the biggest contribution that Ailett made to the field?" And he said, "Well, Miss Avrit," he said, "as you know, back in the day, that all language therapy was done one-on-one with kids. And he said, and that's the way that Miss Cox had been taught. And he said, so when she came to the hospital for the first time with Miss Childs, Sally Childs, they came in and he said, I sat them both down and I said, okay, ladies, I'm going to make a suggestion. How about if we change up and don't do one-on-one therapy with children anymore? Instead, we do group therapy. And then he kind of looked at me with his little sideways grin and he said, and after I picked Miss Cox up off the floor and revived Miss Childs, they agreed that maybe they would try it. So that's what they did.
Gosh, that's awesome stories. Oh my gosh. It's just such, this is why I wanted you on, Karen, for stuff like this. This is so amazing. This is so
You're the connection to the old guard.
Yes. Well,
a good way of putting that, Melissa.
yeah.
My goodness. What is
And
it?
it was
Go ahead.
fun. It was, I mean, it was just fun getting to know him. Dr. Black was there when I was there, just starting out also.
Wow.
So I got to know the more fun side, I guess, of Dr. Waits. And the one thing that I carry with me always from Dr. Waits is I was in the lab school that first year. And he was still over the lab school. And I had a child who was interesting. And we staff our children every month where we go around and talk about their behaviors, see if they need extra help, what's going on. And I had this little guy and he was a problem. And so I was scared to death, but I agreed to staff him. And Dr. Waite said, Miss Avrit, I'm going to ask you 3 questions. And I said, okay. He said, is his behavior keeping him from learning? Yes. Is his behavior keeping the other children in the room from learning? Is his behavior keeping you from teaching? If any of those are yes, there's a problem. And I was like, okay. So even now with the therapist in the lab, those are kind of the 3 questions I go back to with them to see if we really need to staff a child or not, to say, is he a problem to his own learning, the other kids learning, or you're teaching? And if they are, then we have a problem. So
So then what's the remedy at that point? What do you do from there?
Well, the good thing about the hospital is we can use words like ADHD. We can use words like you need to see your pediatrician to talk about ways of helping with ADHD or anxiety or mood disorder or any of those things, because the medical director is always over the lab school. And so it is a medical situation when that happens. So they can talk doctor to doctor, not teacher to doctor. And then the parents are responsible for the medication and all of that. Unlike in the school where if you say, I think your kid's ADHD, great, then the school has to pay for that evaluation. It's not the case in the hospital because we've already evaluated him. And we'll do the full evaluation of the whatever, behavior analysis we're doing at the hospital and give that to the pediatrician for them to make decisions on.
Wow.
I think that's a really good segue into my question that I wanted to ask you. One of my favorite things is identifying or diagnosing. I know we can't say diagnosing. I'm not even a diagnostician, but I love identifying dyslexia in kids because I know it's the catalyst to them getting the help that they need. So can you talk to me about, or to us about, the process of identifying dyslexia through the hospital?
I can give you what I know. And
Okay.
because that's kind of the other hallway. We are very fortunate to have our own diagnostic team over there that That is their specialty. That is what they do. And it is so in depth and deep that, you know, I can't even begin to get all the nuances that they look
Mhm.
at. What I do know is when we look at a child, we look throughout the hospital, it's kind of the thing. We look at the whole child. We
Mhm.
don't just look at, do I think he's dyslexic? We look at the whole child, behavior, mental status, you know, anxiety, mood, all of those things. And, you know, I always laugh a few times at Dr. Black when he would come over and he had identified, like we had a child identified with like Morphan syndrome or something like that. And I'd go, "Ooh, you're playing doctor today." And he's like, "Karen, I'm a doctor every day." But I'm like, yeah, but that's like a real medical diagnosis, you know? And so we watch out for all of those things when they're in the clinic. And then if they're referred to the dyslexia lab, then we have 2 more years to watch out for that also.
Okay.
Wow.
So is that once they were to receive an identification through the hospital, is that a medical diagnosis of dyslexia or is it still an educational diagnosis?
It is because we have the medical team involved. It is a medical diagnosis of dyslexia.
Okay.
I'm going to say I'm pretty sure I'm right on that. So
Okay.
yeah.
That's really good to know. I have a lot of parents that ask me questions about going through the testing process at Scottish Rite. It's a long wait. Everybody knows it's a long wait because it is so thorough and it is a great way to go through the process to get your child the right help that they need. But they ask me a lot of questions about that. So
Our wait time is about 6 weeks now. Is
what?
all. Yes.
What happened?
It couple things are new. Number one, we do charge for testing now, and it is a minimal charge of $900. And the great thing about it is the hospital is the hospital. And we have a group called the Crayon Care Group. And if you apply to get financial help through them, I'm going to just tell you, I don't know of anybody who's not received it.
Oh, wow.
And so it is a great thing that we have. We were down to just about a 3-week wait a few months ago, but of course, with the end of the school year coming up and testing and all that, you know, we are back up again to a longer wait, but not like nothing like it used to be. And I think when the special education law in Texas was when we shifted from 504 gen ed to special ed, everybody got a little scared because now it really does have to go through you know, the special education testing. But that's important, but we're now seeing, okay, they're still wanting the yes, it is for real from Scottish Rite, or
Mhm.
you know, no, it really isn't for real. And
Oh, yeah.
I
And
I just did it with my own grandchild whose school district was dragging their feet and not moving as fast as grammar thought that they should move. And of course I've kind of smelled her out to be dyslexic since she was about 4 or 5. And now that she's 6, we brought her in and had her tested a few weeks ago. And you know,
sure enough.
she's got it. She's got the gene. My brother had the gene, and both of my children, and now 2 out of 4 of my grandchildren, his children are fine, no dyslexia. I'm like, wait, what happened here with all of that? Oh, but yes, both my girls' grandchildren are dyslexic, and both the boys are fine, which I found to be kind of an interesting little sidebar to the family history of dyslexia that we have in our family.
Yeah, my goodness, for sure.
Yeah.
So I'm going to kind of jump into our list a little bit because we talked a little bit about special education. Since at least Texas, I know Take Flight is done in other states and they've always kind of had it under SPED, but have you seen changes come about in how Take Flight is being delivered since Texas has moved to SPED? Special.
Absolutely. I think I think I have seen a change in that I have had to give permission for there to be change, because the one thing the lawyers talk about all the time in all the meetings that we go to is fidelity, fidelity, fidelity.
Mhm.
And kind of a couple big things happened. Number one, school districts in Texas are going to 4 days a week, a lot of them, instead of 5 days a week like they always have been. And in the preface of the book, it clearly states 4 days a week for an hour a day, or 5 days a week for 45 minutes a day.
Right.
And now they're getting 45 minutes a day, 4 days a week, because they don't go to school 5 days a week. And so people are going, so what are we going to do? You know, how are we going to handle that? Well, it's easy. Every fifth day is just a comprehension day. So is it going to take a little longer? Absolutely. And then what about the kids who have lower IQs or slow processing speed or low verbal ability, or, you know, whatever? And again, I do a whole lecture on accommodations modifications now to talk about how to handle that, how to slow it down and it not be wrong, to still meet the rules of fidelity, meaning that you're going to teach the lesson from alphabet through comprehension, whether that comprehension is every day or every fifth day, in order to get that whole lesson cycle in there. But yet you're going to slow it down. Maybe you're going to, you know, do half the lesson one day and half the lesson the other day.
Mm.
Maybe you're going to combine an A-B day together and just do one set of decks, one spelling lesson, and to get through the entire lesson cycle. So I give different ways of modifying the curriculum that you're still meeting the fidelity, but yet having to slow it down for those kids with special needs and that need that specifically designed instruction to meet their IEP goals each year.
That's very comforting, because that was a question I had, and I've seen it on some of the boards that I'm a part of on Facebook, and I've seen it with my own students too. Sometimes they just can't go at the regular pace of the curriculum as intended. And I remember you saying at our retraining, it comes together. I promise it comes together. But there are those kids that it doesn't come together as quickly as it does for other kids. So
Absolutely.
I've seen that in my private practice. Like, okay, this kid needs to do the lesson over 2 days. It just works better that way. And so that brings me comfort to know too, that that it's okay, that I can still see the progress in them, but it's okay to break that up that way.
The dyslexia police will not get you, as I always say.
Good. I was not looking to be caught.
Yes. And, you know, on one of the questions y'all ask about, like the PA, how do you work that with kids with low verbal ability, or and I'm just going to tell you, when we were testing Take Flight back in 2000 and whatever it was, they gave us the opportunity, the hospital gave me the opportunity to go into Corsicana ISD, because that's where I live, and to go into the schools here and to work with the children in the schools to make sure it wasn't just working in the lab school because we made it, or make sure that it was really going to work with public school children. And so I was fortunate enough to get into a school that it was a high English was the second language, always, for all of these kids. And what I saw immediately as I started working with those kids is they could pull down the right mouth pictures in PA, but then when they had to say, oh, It's an unvoiced tongue tapper and a voice lip chiller and smiling vowel. If they were like, they couldn't try to translate all that Spanish, English. And what I finally said is to the teacher, if they're pulling down the right pictures, they get it.
Yeah.
Just let it go. And then you can say, very good. I have an unvoiced tongue tapper, a voiced tongue chiller, and a smiling vowel. I said, or if you have to, just take them to colored squares. And the key thing we want to happen is just being able to segment each individual sound so that they understand that. So I think that's the key for me, is just being able to help them understand, that if they are getting the main point of the lesson, that's the key for me. Same way in automaticity in the rap pages, the whole point of rap is automaticity. So don't code those pages. Don't let them take 10 minutes to unblend one word. It's about recognizing that orthographic pattern and moving faster. And so we want them to be able to do that. Just having to remind, especially our therapist in training, what is the objective of this part of the lesson?
Yes.
And if that's what you need to focus on.
Yes. Perfect. Perfect. Okay. So you've talked about Take Flight, and I'm hoping everybody who is listening knows that this is a big deal. Take Flight's a big deal. How many states is Take Flight in? How many countries at this point?
Currently, we are being used by therapists and students in 46 states and 8 countries.
Wow.
And it's continuing to grow all the time. The one where we are not in, that I have volunteered to go to help them, is Hawaii. But I just haven't made the jump yet.
Okay, take us with you when you
That's
go
it.
there.
You say that
Bring
all the
us with
time.
you.
What's going on? We look at our listenership, and Hawaii's got 0 listeners. I'm like, come on, Hawaii.
Yeah. We just need to go down there and change things for them.
We do. So, Karen, what makes Take Flight then? Obviously, we know what makes Take Flight stand out from other curricula because we work with that all the time. What can you tell our listeners about Take Flight that makes it stand out from other curricula?
Okay, I'm going to kind of hit that a couple of different ways. Number one, why did we even write Take Flight? Right. I think, my own daughter was trained with the videotapes and the dyslexia training program in whatever year it was that she did that, and did great. She's an excellent reader now. It took her a few years to kind of catch up to it, but she caught on. But the one thing that we found out with the dyslexia training program is we're very fortunate at the hospital to sometimes get these wonderful gifts from individuals or groups. And we were able to bring our kids who were in the dyslexia lab back for 5 years after they graduated. And what Dr. Black found out through all that research was our kids were making substantial gains when they were in the dyslexia lab. And when they left the dyslexia lab and went back to regular ed, they began to fall off a little bit. Never got back to where they started, but didn't keep the gains. And so I'll never forget the day he brought us together and told us that and said, so we're going to write a new curriculum. And I'm like, we're who? Who are we? Because Dr. Black had trouble believing was even a sound, much less right curriculum. But he had a determination. And we had already picked up on PA, that PA was going to be a vital part in the late 90s. Barbara Wise came to the hospital, and trained us all in phonological, phonemic awareness with the mouth pictures and all of that.
And who's Barbara
And
Wise?
Barbara Wise is from the University of Colorado.
Okay.
And then she also, sidetrack here, connected us to our next researcher, which was Dr. Jerry Ring, who did the original research on Take Flight. And he came from Boulder, also from Colorado,
Mm.
through a connection with Barbara Wise. So again, always a purpose for everything we do.
Mhm.
But if you remember in the early 2000s, the No Child Left Behind, big thing.
Right.
And so tons of research out about reading, what's important, what parts are important, all of that. Well, Dr. Black's idea was we were going to read all of that research, and we did. And then he would come in and interpret some of it for me. And then also we would talk about what were the most important parts of that. In the meantime, Gladys Kolonowski, who was our administrative director, came to the lab school one day, got me, took me into a classroom with a notepad and pencil, and we each took a child in a classroom and made just jots of how many times, how many words each one of those children actually read during the hour lesson. Gladys's child read 11 words.
Oh.
And mine read 15.
Oh.
And so that was another key indication, we have a little problem.
Right.
So when we finished all of the research, Dr. Black came up with 5, we got to do this to make things better for our kids. One was speed things up so that they could get into connected text faster. They deserve to read more than 11 words in an hour.
Mhm.
At the same time, Sally Shaywitz was publishing her book, which has the picture of how many words our kids are behind than the average reader and then the even above average reader. Again, right on target. So let's get them reading faster, get them in more books. Let's get them in, practice some automaticity practice, teach them how to speed up, write some fluency passages to get those to work on speed. And then the hardest part was that of comprehension, just realizing that, and I say all the time, I have the slides that say, if you can teach a child to decode, of course they'll just get faster, and then of course they can just comprehend. Well, what we know is that is not true, and we found that out pretty quickly. And so to actually write a comprehension part to the curriculum about when the children are reading. And then his biggest push, of course, was that falling off part. Let's see how we can help them take everything they've learned in the 2 years that they've been with us and take it back to transitioning to real world experience in the classroom, in the library, in their life. How can we get them into real world text and make that transition count and stay?
Mhm.
And so, because of those big issues, those big 5 things, that's really why we wrote Take Flight. Now, that definitely posed a problem to me because notice they didn't take away very much, but they sure added a whole lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And I was like, Dr. Black, this is going to be a lifetime program here. If we're going to do this, we're going to have to keep them 3 hours a day every day if you only want it 2 years. And he was like, no, you've got to, figure it out, figure it out. And so that's why we have the AB lesson cycle in Take Flight, so that we could give them that opportunity to use the skills they're learning in decoding and to learn the skills they're using in automaticity to speed things up for rate and fluency and prosody. And then the comprehension strategies we teach every single day, use those in connected text practice then every other day during the B days. And so that became a big push. Plus the fact that we added so much more of the morphology parts with Anglo-Saxon at first and teaching the basics, but then going to that Latin prefix, suffix roots, and then those Greek combining forms. And when we wrote Take Flight, it was much longer. It was,
Oh, no, for real.
yeah, it was a whole nother book. And
It's like the forgotten works.
and when we actually used it with the children, I mean, this is why the lab school is so important to the work that we do at the hospital, because we try it out on those kids. And they're the first ones to say, this is too much. We don't need to know all of this, or what are you talking about? Or that isn't an appropriate sentence, or whatever. And I'll give you an example, and he can cut this out if he wants to. But we're doing the dysgraphia part right now, and I have two girls in the lab teaching the dysgraphia part to some of our students in the lab. One group that's on Bridges and one that's on Take Flight. And the group that's on Bridges is younger. And my youngest grandson plays baseball. And so I just wrote as a sentence, I want to hit. Well, Daphne was like, Karen, no problems, with the kids. We meet with them once every few weeks to correct all the mistakes in the books. That's part of the joy of having a lab school. And Carla came in and said, Karen, you cannot use that sentence. And I said, what? And she said, when I read that to my junior high and high school boys, they all went, what? You want to hit? What? And she goes, I was like, wait, no, not what she meant, but can't use that sentence. So we had to do some rewriting. So yeah. So fortunately, fortunately we have, kids that will help us. It was my class I had 6 boys in a class. I say all the time, lowest IQ in the room was mine. And I know that to be true because I knew all their IQs. And they were the ones that really helped with the names of all the mouth pictures and talking through that. And they really helped. I always offer the training of anything new to the trainers first. And so that's what I did. I offered everybody to come in, and Judy Bursch happened to be there in that training.
Oh,
nice.
And she said to me when we started doing the PA part, she was like, Karen, these kids will never get these names. They'll never get all of this. It's too fast, And I said, can I show you? And she said, yep. So I went and got my kids and I brought them over, put all the mouth pictures on the board and just started going to town with them. And they started moving all those around and naming them and all. I looked at Judith and I said, well, and she said, amazing. And I said, they need it. That's why it's so important to them. Wow. So anyway, yeah, it's without the lab school. I mean, it's really, we would have to be in a class more often, but now we have our classes just there for us.
I think I have a therapist friend who went through training at Scottish Rite before it was Take Flight. I think she was like the last group doing the DTP. And I remember her showing me the mouth pictures because I guess they had some access to that. And she was showing it to me and I was like, Robin, this doesn't make sense to me. I don't understand this. I wasn't a therapist. I was a dyslexia teacher. I was like, I don't understand what you're showing me. What is phonological? Why are we manipulating the sounds? This isn't reading. What are we doing? I mean, this was early, in the probably mid 90s, something like that. And I didn't understand it, but seeing it in action with our kids, it's important. It's important that we do all of this with them. And I love the progression that you've talked about. So you've talked about how Take Flight came to be. What were the curricula or of course it's OG approach. I get that question a lot. Is it OG based? Yes, it's OG based. But what were their curriculums or the approaches before Take Flight? What would be the order of that?
Well, I think it started early on with ALIT with the situation
Mhm.
books, situation learnings. And then it went to after the situation learning books, then the DTP, I think. Yes, and Etta Biddle. Now you want to talk about pressure. Etta was still working at the hospital
Oh my gosh.
when I was writing Take Flight.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Imagine.
So no pressure there. And but I only want to be in my retirement as supportive and helpful and again supportive as what she was to me, and she hadn't even retired yet.
Yeah.
But I would stay up at night. One time we were looking at the card decks and we were going to take 3E out of the card decks. And if you remember, it used to have
Mhm.
the ED cards in there.
Mm.
And so I had stayed up planning my speech to Etta, my justification for taking those out the next day, talking to her. She and I sat down in a room together and I said, Etta, I want to talk about the card decks. And she's like, okay. And I said, I want to take, I'd like to take the suffix ED cards out because they're the only suffixes we have. She said, Karen, the only reason those cards are in there is because Betty Muse could never remember the suffix ED rules. And so we put them in there. I was like, are you kidding me? She said, no. I said, okay, I have another one. And she said, 3. And I said, yes. She said, I took that out a long time ago. EE is going to be read E no matter where it
Oh,
is.
for real.
I was
Okay.
like, are you kidding me? I lost a night's sleep worried about that.
Here's another one. Letter. Fern letter.
Letter.
Yeah. And now it's Fern or what it did. Oh, we just left
Yeah,
letter
you left
off.
letter
Yeah.
because I get that question a lot when I do the other side, and
It-
I'm like, it's
It's
an accent.
same exact reason
Yeah,
because ER is no
yeah.
matter what position it's in. And so
Yeah.
that's why we don't even code the ER with like a circumflex or a tilde like we did, like we do the others, because
Mhm.
it's no matter what. It's
Mhm.
all the time. And
Mhm.
so here's a little known fact. EPS published all of our previous curricula for the
Yes.
hospital. And they were given first right of refusal for Take Flight, which they refused. And so it is self-published. So now we can go in and make any changes at any time that we want to. But when they own the copyright, you can't. When they
Right.
take on the publishing of it. Well, all of the riddles that went with the original keywords, if you notice in Take Flight, they're all different
Yeah.
because they became owners of all of those riddles.
Oh.
And so we had to rewrite all of those riddles. And I mean, one staff member, and that was her job, was to rewrite those riddles and to make sure that they could not in any way, be said as we copied them from the old,
Right.
as they
That
had to be different.
that's the type of stuff I love to hear. Okay. My goodness gracious.
Yeah.
Okay, here's some more curricula stuff. And you heard me say the other day that I've been doing dyslexia in some way, shape, or form since 92. Um, Dictation. You brought it in super early. I mean, what, lesson 4 or something like
Yeah.
that?
With lesson 6, we start phrases and
Yeah,
then sentences. Yeah.
yeah.
Marcia Henry, who I just happened to, um, be on a talking. I said it was kind of the traveling show that I've had the honor to be on a panel with her, Barbara Wise, Suzanne Carricker, Valerie Tucker, myself. And so anyway, so Marcia and I got to be pretty good friends. And she was in for a meeting one time. And I said, Marcia, I would love for you to look at just where I'm going and kind of my master lesson cycle of the curriculum. And she said, oh, Karen, I would love to do that. And so she did. And she came back to me and she said, why did you wait until the second year to start your dictation with spelling? And I gave the answer that we all sometimes give, because that's what we've always done. And she said, not a very good answer, Karen. And I said, what? And she goes, have you always done automaticity before? No. Have you done rate before? No. Why do you need to wait till the second year to do dictation? She said, do it earlier. Do it as soon as you can. As soon as you have enough words to make a phrase or a sentence, do it.
So is that to work on the working memory? Is that what the thought process is there?
And to connect those word parts into a flow of a sentence, and to understand what a sentence is, and that it has to have meaning behind it in order for it to be a sentence. So some of them are kind of crazy, like the wig is on the pig, but you know, it is a sentence with a capital letter and a punctuation mark, and has a subject and a predicate, and forms a complete thought. So
yeah,
there you go.
And the kids like those silly sentences.
They do.
They do. They do. That's I love that. That was, and in fact, it's kind of changed how I train on the other side of things too. I bring it forward because y'all did. I bring it forward, not as soon, but sooner than
Yes.
formal, you know, for other curricula. So the fluency piece, man, I've tried writing fluency stories before. That's really hard. I mean, what was the process like for that?
First of all, I had a very intelligent young woman, Clayton Allen, who worked with us at that time. And, you know, Connie always used to say this to me, and I didn't get it until I got it. But with people you train, you just know that they need to be in a training position because they get it.
Yeah.
Well, what do they have? Well, I can't explain that, but you know they have it. They have whatever it is. And she was one who had it.
Yeah.
And so she came in and wrote the initial papers, took a lot of revision. And I'm going to tell you, we were already published before we caught two of them. We used the word pumpkin for VCCV words one time. And that was like, no, can't do that. But then and here's the funny part. She talks about the proposal. She talks about she got married during that time. You know, it was part of her life, just like the fluency story. Ryan and Abby visit the Atlantic. Those are my grandchildren.
Aww.
And we do go to the Atlantic Ocean with 70 of my closest relatives every summer on the beach in big houses in Ocean Isle, North Carolina. And that whole story is absolutely true about our life.
Aww.
And so, yeah, just a little side story. My granddaughter was in training, and they got to that story, and her teacher gave her that story, and she said Abby got through about the first 3 lines of it and goes, "Hey, wait, I think this story's about me." And Lindsay said, "Abby, it is about you. You are correct. Now, do you want to finish reading it?"
Stop the timer. Yes.
Yes. So, yeah.
That's funny.
Okay, so can you talk to us a little bit about the mouth pictures? That was the hardest thing for me to learn, all of those names, because I moved from one district that used MTA to a district that used Take Flight, and I had to do a crash course in Take Flight doing the retraining, and I had to go to Shelton for part of the training because I couldn't start with you guys in time. Like it was a big mess. But the mouth pictures, oh my gosh, I thought I was never going to learn all those names. So what was the inspiration using the mouth pictures alongside with your PA instruction and the spelling component?
Great question. When we first learned the PA mouth pictures and all of that, we were still training in the DTP. And by that, I don't mean the videotapes. We trained therapists to use those books to teach. And so when we did that, we didn't know where to put it. I mean, there was, what do you do? So we went with developmentally. Developmentally, PA is supposed to come before alphabet. So we put it at the beginning, and that's, Amy, where your friend, I'm sure, heard about it, because we put it at the beginning of each lesson. It was the first 5 minutes of every lesson of instruction. And so I knew that that was going to be something we definitely incorporated into Take Flight. And again, you learn by what you live. Dr. Black and I did did a presentation to a group of doctors. We have a developmental pediatric conference every year at the hospital. And Dr. Black and I did one together. And now these are all pediatricians from across everywhere. And so it came time for us to do the presentation. And this was when PA was kind of the new thing, when it was just coming out. And Dr. Black did the whole brain thing. Here's where it is in the brain. Here's what it does. Here's how it helps with reading. Here's the part it plays in, that it doesn't play in a dyslexic child, da, 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 da. My job was to come in and give everybody little blocks and have them give them a word, slip, and have them unblend those blocks. They couldn't do it at all. I would say slip, and they'd go slip, and I'd be like, no, let's try that again. And so I'd talk about how if your mouth moves, your tongue moves, it's 2 sounds. Those doctors were fascinated. At the end of the day, when they did their evaluations, Dr. Black got a poor rating because his was a neurobio, it was about the brain, and they knew about the brain. Who got the highest rating of the day? Me. Because I taught them something they did not know. And I figured if these guys and women could get to college and still think that spoil was 1 sound, that we really needed to focus on that with our kids. And so just being able to segment those individual sounds became so important. And then if we're going to do that and we're going to manipulate those sounds, really and truly, the first year we did it, we did the mouth pictures for PA1 and PA2. And then I went back to colored blocks on their desks for spelling. And, the team, when we got together every week, was like, why don't we just see what happens if we leave the mouth pictures and let them spell with the mouth pictures? And it worked, and they got it. And it, just to say to the kids, wait, what's happening in your mouth? Oh, my tongue is tapping. That's a tongue tapper, right? Is it voiced or unvoiced? Just to be able to take them to something that concrete that's actually happening in their mouth made all the difference in the world. And so we take them from that very concrete piece to the colored squares in the second year to finally dots on their paper to identify those sounds. And, that again, we're really thankful we have the kids in the lab that can help us know how to do that. And they do a great job.
I love hearing that. And I did not know that part about the color blocks, like you went, but part of me thinks maybe I did, because I was that not first retraining, but one of the first retraining groups in 2004, because that's when I got my out. And I remember going to Scottish Rite and sitting in some big room. I don't know where it was, and working with those trays and going, Robin showed me this before. What am I doing? I'm trying to remember all this, but I did not know that it wasn't, or maybe I did. I don't know. There's a lot in there now.
Mhm.
I have a question about the order of presentation. So we see in alphabetic phonics, scope and sequence, ITP, NSA, as that sounds like LDFH. We saw in situation learning, we saw it in DTP, we see it in MTA. I don't know, there might be other curricula out there that have that same order. Why did you change the order of presentation? Yeah, the order of presentation.
Great question. The first order of presentation, all of that, and just for background knowledge, is based on the Hannah study. That is seriously a book about this big. We have it at the hospital. It's relentless. It's like a giant dictionary.
Wow.
And that is based on the number of times a letter is used in English words. And so if you notice on Wheel of Fortune, what are the letters they give them for free every time? The same ones that starts with, because those are the most frequently used letters. And people go, how do you know that? Well, I'm sorry. Useless knowledge, maybe not everybody needs to know, but there you go. And so we began talking about that because I had a very difficult time not starting with a vowel, knowing that then we couldn't teach a word until I got a vowel in there somewhere. But once we did the mouth pictures, I kind of went with the positioning of the sounds in the mouth, b, t, d, and that's why we go to and v so early on in Take Flight, as opposed to V being later on in the DTP and MTA and all of those. I kept the vowels in the same exact order of frequency as what they are in the Hannah and Hannah study. And when it came to making certain decisions about things, like I moved M and N up because I felt like it was more important than some of those others that came after it, even though the cognates were what we taught when we originally did the mouth pictures in the 90s. We taught the stops first, and then the continuance next, and then we called them the cousin sounds, the yeah, and the and the cognates we called twin sounds because they're made exactly the same way, only the only difference is voiced and unvoiced. And then we talked about the cousin sounds, which are now the sails of the ship, because we all have something in common with our cousins, but nothing like a twin. And so they're kind of a relative sound. They have something in common with each of them. And then the vowel sounds, we spent countless hours in front of a mirror working on, and to get them where they are. But PA was easy to put into Take Flight because we had already preempted that. And so I felt okay. Of course, I got a phone call from my son-in-law, Karen, why would you teach on the same day? And I said, why? And he said, because they look too much alike. And I'm like, is Abby having trouble with that? And he's like, no, but I am. And I'm like, well, maybe you need my program. But it seems to help to teach P and B and D right there together, because we attack it right at the beginning, and it's all about where the mouth placement is and the sounds that they make going down that chart.
Wow. Okay. That's
So I have a question about this though. So as far as the speech sounds, I know the mouth pictures look like what they look like in our mouth. So who was instrumental in kind of identifying all of those placements of our tongue and our lips and all of that?
first Barbara Wilson, who came from Colorado, helped with
Okay.
that. When we kind of redid him at the hospital, I really wanted to make smiling vowel R open vowel R, and or round vowel R,
It makes sense.
but it's wrong. Dadgummit. I so wanted it to be right. But we have a speech language pathologist, Sue Jones, on our staff. And she came and worked hours with me to help me really know where the speech sounds are. And if you look in situation spelling from the green original
Mhm.
book, it's all, and all is still open sound. And so it's a smiling vowel, and then ah, for R, and then or is all, that other open sound. So I was like, oh, fine. I mean, I tried to fight my way, and truly, the sound of R by itself, I made incorrectly all my life until we started doing the mouth pictures. And I thought I didn't want just the sound of R, to be a curler, because my tongue did not curl anywhere. And Sue worked with me and said, Karen, the sides of your tongue curl up around your teeth. And I go, mine don't. And she was like, well, then you're not making the sound correctly. Let's do it. And so, she would work with me to help make the sounds correctly. And that's why we did it.
So these
And
are all really great things for the kids to know too. Like I'll tell my kids, my tongue is kind of curling like a taco and it's touching on the sides of my teeth. And then that kind of helps them understand it a little bit better. But I also think that hearing it from you too, because I don't know why we do all the things we do with all those mouth pictures. I'm just trusting you guys. But I think it's very interesting to hear how the speech therapists have kind of played a role in some of that as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And without that, I mean, I would have never been able to do that on my own. I mean, I needed somebody who knew more about that. And here's just another interesting story. Again, keep or take away. The mouth pictures originally were hand drawn and hand colored by hand for several years. And we have kids in the lab every day, and parents bring them. And on the second year of one of the girls' classes, her dad comes to my door. And he said, if I have to watch the video in that lobby one more time, I'm going to jump out that window. He said, give me something to do. And I said, okay. And, I mean, I didn't know anything about the man. So I first gave him stuff to make copies of. And he'd come back and he'd go, Karen, that was a really bad copy. So I straightened it up and I got it right. And now it's, and I was like, okay, this guy could be useful. Well, we were working on the mouth pictures one day and we had him in there and I was coloring them. And he came in and he said, what are those? And they were on my wall. And I said, those are our mouth pictures. And he said, those are terrible. And I said, thank you. I worked hard on those. And he said, have you ever thought about doing a computer drawing of them? And I just laughed at it. I said, no, Barry, I can't computer draw anything. He said, do you mind if I try? He took those mouth pictures home, came back a week or so later. His daughter said, if I have to make the sound of whatever one more time, my dad keeps going, what do you mean you're kicking your tongue in the back of your throat? I don't get it. And so he came back with them a couple weeks later, had all of them done just exactly what you have now in your
Wow.
kits. He drew them all out like that, as well as the brain picture. And he had been a graphic artist for an oil company.
Oh,
And I had
Wow.
not a single clue what he did. And for his daughter, our services in our lab school are without charge. And so he chose then to take us down to legal, and he signed over all the copyrights to all those
Wow.
maps to the hospital.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's an amazing story.
it is. Yeah.
My gosh, that's a
Just,
great story.
yep. Again, just right people, right place, right
Mhm.
time. You know, not anything a human can plan, just, you know, above our pay grade for sure.
That's right.
So now that you've had some years with Take Flight out there, do you ever look at some of the lessons, go, I don't know if I'd do it like that again?
There's one I always say,
Yeah.
if I could, I would go back and change. So, and I don't even know how it got through to publication without anybody calling me on it. And that is, I teach consonant suffix ful, bull, before I teach before book and
Oh.
I had no idea how I'm like, you people were supposed to tell me these things. But anyway, that was one I say all the time. If I could go back and change one thing for sure, that would be it. And then the other thing, I'm sorry, my computer died here. The other thing that I would go back and change, and this is not from me, but from my staff who complain every time they get to the final stable syllables.
Oh, no.
They and they're like, we're on final stable syllable.
We're in it for
Really? They're like,
years.
"Yeah." And then the next day they commit, we're on final stable syllables again. So when I wrote
So they don't
Jet,
want it in 3 lessons?
oh no, no, they think that is ridiculous, too much final stable syllables. So when I wrote Jet, the high school curriculum, I put all the final stable syllables in one lesson. And the very first time somebody taught it, they came in and went, you put all the final syllables in one lesson. I said, yes. And they were like, that's a lot. I'm like, look, people, you gripe if it's too many, you gripe if it's not enough. Which is it?
Gosh.
So if you get bored with it and Take Flight, you can teach everything in one lesson in Jet.
That's right. That's right. So let's talk about these other curricula that have just, boy, it feels like boom, 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 boom. All these other curricula have been coming out. Let's talk a little bit about JET. Who is JET designed for?
Jet is designed for when we wrote it, we said high school and above. We have now used it with 8th grade boys this year, and they have done really, really well. Now, the key is you have to have a child who can move as fast as Jet moves, because they're getting 3 new graphemes a day for like the first 10, 15 lessons. And then there are times that they might get 4 suffixes in one lesson. So it goes. The difference is, and the way I've shifted that a little bit is, I do the introductions to like P and B and I are all lesson 1. So they get the introduction of P, B, and I, and then they do the application of all 3 of them together. So instead of P in an application and B in an application and I in an application, we do all the introductions as one and then one application, so that there's it's a lot to get through in 45 minutes. And, you know, we've had to speed it up.
I kind of love JET, honestly. I love training teachers in it. I loved everything I saw. I really liked how fast it went, because I could see for our older kids, Take Flight would go really slow for our older kids.
Yes.
So it made a lot of sense. And then conversely, build. It's not to replace a dyslexia curriculum. That's always what I tell people.
Oh,
But
yeah.
talk a little bit about the why behind build.
Well, first of all, remember, you know, I started in junior high, but then I went to kindergarten. And I see one young man specifically around town all the time. And I want to go up and apologize to him every day and say, I am so sorry that when you couldn't get rhyming and you never could get, are these two sounds the same at the beginning or the end of a word, that I didn't know enough then to say, let's get you tested. Let's see what we can do about you. Now his children are in the program, but I want to apologize to him all the time because those younger kids were always my passion. And when they started talking and research began coming out, because now remember, I've been in this for a long time, and we used to say, oh, you couldn't tell if they were dyslexic till the third grade.
Right. Mhm.
I mean, because it's just developmental up till then. Well, I know with my own children, I always say with Michael Avrit, I knew at birth, but I knew early on with those kids, my own kids. And so that was part of my initiative when I was president of ALTA, was really that young child, getting that young child tested earlier, the push to get the K1 testing done in the schools early on. So we could do that identification early so they wouldn't have to hit the backlash of being, in the slowest group and made fun of and having to go to the bathroom in church every time anybody asked you to read a Bible verse or whatever. I mean, it was what it was. And we had already done pre-flight, but we were never able to publish pre-flight because it wasn't a full curriculum. It didn't have that letter sound correspondence. It was really just a 36 lesson, here's some basic phonological awareness that they probably missed. But I had already kind of written the outline for build several years ago. And so when Debbie and Cheryl got to the hospital, they called me in and said, we would really like to expand the offerings at Scottish Rite. So we already had Take Flight in place. We had already started Bridges, which is the Avatar program. And so when they said we'd like to expand what we offer, I said, well, what about, a K1 curriculum? And they were like, yeah, what about that? And I said, to meet the needs of the schools where they are right now, which is always our first thought, let's make that happen. And I was like, okay. So, it was kind of close to COVID time. We were still working in and out of the home. It came easy. I knew, I taught kindergarten for 5 years. I knew what I was doing with it. And I had a really good outline. So that came out fairly easy. Then they said, what else have you been working on? And I said, well, we were writing a high school curriculum, but we put it on the shelf because we wanted to do Bridges instead. And Debbie was like, you have a high school curriculum? And I said, well, I have the scope and sequence of a high school curriculum. And she said, go get it. And I said, okay. So I went and got it and brought it out and of course tweaked it and added and took away, but had a basic foundation for JET. And so that was huge. And then Turbo Start came about at Region 10 when the lawyer said, I don't care if you're on lesson 49 of Take Flight. If this kid is ordered into your class tomorrow, you'll start him on lesson 50. And I was like, no. And all the heads turned around to look at us. And I was just going, you can't do that. I mean, you're destroying the child, the other children, and the therapist, by the way, when you try to put a child in on lesson 50 or 70 or whatever it might be. And so I was sitting at a table with some of the girls that I had trained over the years. and Debbie and Lori. And I said, we cannot let that happen. We've got to have something. So before I left the building that day, I had a scope and sequence for Turbo Start
Wow.
and went back. We made it a team effort. We found that out in late September. We made it a team effort to have it done by January 1st. I divided up my team into, here's the scope and sequence. I'll write all the new learning. You write the sentences, you write the words, you do the spelling, you do, and that's what we did. And every week we met together with 4 new lessons a week and finished Turbo Start so that we could get it out to the schools because they were dying
Yeah.
for help of
Yeah.
what to do with these kids that were being, onesie twosie at a time and dropping into their program in the middle of the program, which would make sometimes 10 kids in their program and in their class. And so that's how we kind of came across Turbo Start.
Yeah, I was in that situation too. They get, at the time 504 arted in, and the parents would waive the
Right.
5-day period, and you're like, well, okay, we're kind of far ahead, but okay. And now, doesn't
Yeah,
it say at the beginning of Take Flight they have to start at lesson 1?
does now.
Mhm.
It didn't. I called TEA. I mean, I'm just being real. And I called and said, how can you, what happened to the cumulative sequential part of the law? And they said, but Karen, special education law says that they are to receive services immediately.
Yeah.
And I said, but that's so unfair to
Mhm.
those, to that child and all the others. And I mean, the hands were, the law was the law. And so I just felt like we had to come up with a way to work around that and a way to help those kids get a start. It has everything that handbook says it has to have. But it gives them a start. And it didn't matter if they start in lesson 1, lesson 10, lesson 15. I don't care where they start. They can drop in and drop out of that until there's another group made and they can move forward.
And
That's
we're at a point now where
crucial.
we can train like reading interventionists in Turbo, right?
Yes, it
Yeah.
can be any certified teacher.
Okay.
That's really crucial because I have students who I see in my private practice who everyone, every time they come, I say, okay, what did you learn in school today in your dyslexia class? Oh, well, we really haven't gotten very far. We got a new student and we haven't learned any new lessons in a long time. And I'm like, oh my gosh, well, we got to make sure that you're learning some lessons. So I know what I'm needing to teach them. I teach them the lessons, but that is crucial for them in public school to get that assistance. So I love to hear that they've got that available to them now. And I hope some school districts, maybe the administrators who may be listening to our podcast, will start to implement that. That would be
Absolutely. Because for Take Flight therapists, it's a half a day of training. For a certified teacher, it's just 1 day of training. Is all that it
Oh.
is. So,
Yeah.
they can learn to implement that, whether they're a special education teacher, just a teacher that has that open hour that they can teach remedial reading or whatever they need to do. It's available to them.
That's
So
wonderful.
So Bridges
Talking,
is the Avatar, excuse me. So Bridges is the Avatar curricula and it's the same scope and order of presentation
yes.
of Take Flight, right?
Absolutely. It is Take Flight. The sentences are the same, the words are the same. The difference is Miss Hallie, who sounds very familiar because it's my voice. Um, she teaches, the way we came about that was, what is the hardest part of the curriculum to train therapists?
Yeah.
And the hardest part was to get them to be so precise and exact and to help change their thinking on new learning and why we had to do the linkages and do all of that. And then the prep for reading, because your knowledge has to be in depth to prep for reading. and prep for spelling. And so that's what Miss Hallie does. It is 10 to 15 minutes of a lesson is all the avatar does. Everything else is scripted, and it's scripted with very few exceptions from Take Flight. The difference is I chose which rap page. The average, I can't help but do that. The average dyslexic student will read.
Yeah.
We really work to be sure that it's kind of that middle of the road group that will make progress, but yet the scope and sequence, order of presentation, exactly the same. So if a child is in a Bridges class and is struggling, they can transition to a therapist if there's one available and be exactly on the same lesson that they were on when they were in Bridges.
Yeah.
And same way, if you get a kid who, I always say with those boys that I had, once I wrote the 3 words on the board, I could have left the room because they would look at it and go, oh, they're all 1 syllable base words. They all have short vowels and they all have a final CK. Why am I here? I mean, so those kids the avatar is great for them, but Hallie takes her time. The good thing about it is the teacher can make her go back and say things again. They can take time in between all of them to move forward. And so the teacher has much more control than the videotape program that we did originally.
That was
Where
what I asked about. What's the
Yeah.
difference?
Yeah, because the videotape was relentless. You put it in, you plugged it in, and you went with it. Here the teacher in the classroom is truly a co-teacher to Miss Hallie. And if the kids miss, so the name of the letter is, they push the button back and Miss Hallie says again, so the name of the letter is, and if they miss the new learning and they can't respond, they can take them back to the new learning if they need to get her to do it, listen again. Let's hear it one more time so that they can get all of that in.
Wow, that's amazing.
That's cool. So, my origin story I've said before, and I'm not going to go into great detail about
Origin,
it.
sound like multiverse superhero origin story type of thing.
I'm so grateful that I was put into the dyslexia world by my now coworker, Allison. So I hope she's listening. She got me started in dyslexia by being her long-term sub while she was pregnant. And I fell in love with it. I didn't love it right away because I was an elementary teacher and I was going to teach reading with all the cute little things. And, you know how we learn how to teach reading.
I do know. Yes.
So at first I didn't love it, but then I saw their progress and I saw how the kids are just brilliant. They're just neat people. And I fell in love with them and I fell in love with their progress and I fell in love with how it felt to work with them and be assisting with like a bigger purpose, I felt. So what advice would you give to an instructor considering a move, or somebody like me considering a move into dyslexia therapy from your perspective?
Well, one thing is you'll never teach the same way again. Never. I mean, if I went back into a public school classroom right now, whether it was kindergarten or 3rd grade or even junior high English, I would not teach the way I did then. You know more about the English language than anyone around you, which is kind of interesting. I mean, I'm just going to say the way I got into it is I was a 3rd grade teacher. My brother is very dyslexic, didn't know till he was in college. So dyslexia was always kind of back there for me. And one day I was teaching 3rd grade and I put the rooftop over the A, and one of the kids in my class goes, ma'am, that has a name, right? And I said, what has a name? And he said, that rooftop. And I said, it has a name? And he said, yes, ma'am, that's called a circumflex. So I looked it up. He was right. And I said, how do you know that? And he says, we use that in our dyslexia program. So that day I went
Oh.
straight down to Nancy Phillips and said, how can I become a part of this? Because this kid knows more than I do. And I think I'm, an average teacher or above, and he's telling me what I don't know. So I think that's really important. The other thing is, and I want to be sure to mention this, Tim Odegaard, Dr. Tim Odegaard, who is a research scientist and at in
Middle
Tennessee, Middle
Yeah.
Tennessee State. Yeah. Tim came to us many years ago and came to Dr. Black and I and said, I would like to become a therapist. Why? Why do you want, you're a PhD in research at the University of Texas in Arlington. He said, I want to understand what I need to research. I want to
Yeah.
understand really how it works from the bottom up. And he did. And he had a lab class at the university. Kids came to him every day. He taught the curriculum. But when he went to graduate, he waited to the end. At our graduation at that time, every person got to say a little something. So it came time for him to say a little something. And he got up and he had a huge picture frame in his hand. And he walked up and he looked at the teachers, and he had told them for 2 years, I could never do what y'all do. I could not handle teaching dyslexia, doing bus duty, taking care of lunch duty, taking, my own family backwards and forwards wherever they needed to do. That was beyond anything he ever thought he could do. But he raised up this picture, and he had taken our kids from the dyslexia lab into fMRI machines.
Mm.
And he had fMRI pictures of pre
Oh, wow.
remediation brains and post remediation brains. And he said, I have told you guys for 2 years that you are superheroes in my book. He said, but what I want you to know is you're brain surgeons, and I have the proof, because you truly change the brains of dyslexic children with what you do. And then he went on to tell his story, that he is dyslexic, and had he been able to have that as a child. And I can hardly talk about it without tearing up, because it was such a validation for me personally, of course, as the author of Take Flight, but for all the kids that we help,
Yeah.
which, are thousands and thousands a year, to know that as a teacher, what you now know allows you to be a brain surgeon. It allows you to truly change the brain of a child with dyslexia. And that's, more than you could ever think or hope for, I think, in your life.
It's stunning, and it gives me chills. And then I also think, not only are you changing that child's life, you're changing the whole life of the family too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh my
Yes.
God. And those teachers who made the change to become therapists, that's huge when you think of, because there's plenty of teachers that think, I could do more with my students, but I just don't know how.
What? Mhm.
But, and it's just overwhelming to think of the impact that Take Flight, Scottish Rite, everything has on the dyslexia community. I mean, we are the hub. I joke around. I say, throw a rock, you hit a Celt out here. But and I wish other states had that. I hear from people in other states quite a bit, hey, we don't have therapists out here. I'm like, wow. And it just seems unreal to me because I'm immersed in it on this side. Oh my God. So Karen, what are you going to do when you retire now?
Great question. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is the week following, my husband and I are going on a trip with another couple that are friends of ours. We're going to drive to New York City and tour our way up there. We're going to get on a ship and take a cruise up through Canada, Nova Scotia,
Oh,
and
wow.
through Maine and back down to New York, and then take a week to get back home. So, kind of a 3-week vacation of touring that side of the country and coming back to the Dallas Fort Worth area.
Wow.
And I have been fortunate enough that there's a training center opening in Houston that I am going to help with that. And darn, in Houston, where my 2 youngest grandchildren are. And so it gives me a little bit of an excuse to spend even more time with them. The 2 here are older, 16 and 12, very active, very going, and we have always been there with them through every cow, every public speaking, all of that. And now with these 2, we have a baseball player and a cheerleader. So we'll be doing some fun events on the weekends, I'm sure.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
So you're
So
going to retire, but you're also going and helping set up this new program. So kind of retirement.
kind of retirement. That's what my husband said. You're
I
kind
don't,
of retiring.
I was going to say, I don't really see you retiring. I don't see you just stopping it at all. Um, okay. So we're getting close to wrapping it up. So our listeners, and my coworker, you've met Stephanie, she said stop asking them for your speakers for books and articles and stuff. 'Cause my husband's getting tired of seeing my Amazon cart. But do you have any articles or books you'd refer people to when they're asking about dyslexia or anything along those lines? Or who inspires you still?
Oh, so many people still inspire me, of course, with everything that they're doing. And I'm just gonna I'm gonna say a couple of things to that. Number one, as a mother, so I'm gonna speak as the mom, the one book that probably helped me the most, and now remember, this is a long time ago, was No One to Play With.
Oh,
And that is because it talks about the social side of dyslexia. And I had that little girl who was either really comfortable with young children or being a part of a grown up group. She never quite fit in with her own age group of kids until she got much older. And as a mother, that really bothered me because I was like, you got to have some friends your own age. But she felt safe with the young ones because she knew as much as them, or if not more. And she knew she had a problem that she couldn't read, but she didn't know how to deal with that with her friends. And so I'm just going to say that's probably the book that impacted me as a mother quite a bit because I needed that social side of understanding dyslexia and understanding a disability. And now she knows everybody in Corsicana, Texas, and can't go to Walmart with her without, having to stop and chat 20 times. But, she's very social now. But that took a while for us to get to that point in her life. And as a parent with a young child with dyslexia, I think that's important to know. As far as, other people, I think there are so many new people out there now with good articles. Tim Odegaard wrote a great article about the dyslexic brain. And the thing you gotta love about Tim is he's walked it.
Yeah.
So he can not only tell you about what this part of the brain does, but what part of your remediation will help that part of the brain.
Wow.
And so, that's if you ever get a chance to have him do that lecture for you, or you get a hold of that article, it's probably, he got tired of giving it for me, because that's what I'd ask him for every time. And he goes, but I've done so much more research. And I'm like, I don't care. That's what I want to hear. And that's what I want these people to hear, that what part of the brain are they honing in on? Why do we do the mouth pictures? Why do we do that automaticity? Why do we do all of that? What part of the disability are you helping to remediate when
Do you know what
do
that's called? That article? Do you have that name off the top of your
I
head?
don't
The
have it off.
Alta,
It was in the Alta newsletter,
yeah,
and I have it, and I can certainly send it. But yes,
I might have that, just saying.
yeah. And so those are probably my, my go-to if I am really wanting to talk to a teacher, a therapist, or wanting to talk to a parent about their difficulty with their child. And I've been there, done that.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Those are great. That's great. Yeah. I'm going to look for that Know When to Play With book. I'm really curious about it.
Okay, so I'm going to ask my magic question.
Question.
I need a sound effect for this.
Yeah, you should have a little.
We'll get our producer on it.
If you had one wish that you could grant for our students, what would it be and why?
Oh, I think that the one wish would be that they would never have to know what it was like to have the inability to read. And the other wish is, if that were to persist, and I didn't get my first wish, my wish would be they gave it everything they could in the amount of time that we have them for remediation. They didn't bring so much baggage to the table, that they came for a purpose, and they did it and heard it and internalized all of it, so that they could be the best they could be in the future. I think,
love it.
yeah, that's my,
That's
I
wonderful.
want all kids to be able to do
Yeah.
be the best they can be, whether that's the best welder they can be, like my son is, or, the best social butterfly. My daughter's she runs I forget the operations manager of a huge church downtown. And what that means is she knows every person in that church. And, and all their kids and all the family. And, that is her thing. My brother is a lawyer. And, we didn't know he was dyslexic until he was grown and in college. And, so anything you put your mind to, you can do, and just do it to the best of your ability.
That's right. That's wonderful.
Thank
you, Karen.
Oh my
You're
gosh, this
welcome.
has been such a good interview, and I've learned still so much. And I know I didn't ask all the questions still. There's gonna be more. We'll do a
I think we just need her back.
oh, there you
She'll
go.
be retired. I mean,
Oh.
she'll have all the time in the world.
Didn't we say that too? I think we said that. That's
See
so
what happens. Yeah, see.
well, awesome. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and end this. So this is Amy.
And Melissa,
We're the
Dyslexia Duo.
Until we see you next time. Thanks, y'all. Bye.
Bye.